So Jackie, we're here at Floriade, which is very appropriate given that you've written a number of gardening books, but we're here today to talk about Hitler's Daughter.
Yes.
Because we've included an extract from your book in The Invisible Thread.
Yes.
And it's a YA novel. It's an incredibly compelling book, and the premise for the story is fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit about it for those who haven't read it?
It's the story of Hitler's Germany in World War II and its implications, told from the point of view of a girl who hopes and wishes and even believes that she might actually be Hitler's daughter rather than one of Hitler's foster children. It is, like most of my books, in fact just about all of my books, based on real stories, but of course changed to protect the innocent, protect the guilty, and protect myself from defamation. In this case, it started, I was 14 years old, doing my German homework, except I wasn't doing my German homework. I was having a hissy fit saying, I can't do it, my life is ruined. I will never go to school again. And my mother called a friend of hers who she thought spoke German and said, look, could you help her with the translation? He came over and went to bed. It was actually very late at night by now. We sat at the kitchen table. He translated my homework. And I think he was drunk. In fact, I think he was actually very drunk, so he hid it well. He hadn't been expected to be called out late at night to help a kid with her homework. Because there in the silent kitchen, he told me a story. Now, this is just a story, just pretend. Just like Hitler's Daughter is just a story. 4 kids at a bus stop with one of them telling them a story, and it is just a story. He told me of a 14-year-old boy in Hitler's Germany who joined the Nazi Party because his parents were Nazis, his teachers were Nazis. Everything he had ever read or heard said it was good to be a Nazi. He believed the whole Herrenvolk myth. He believed that anyone who was Jewish, Gypsy, Seventh-day Adventist, had any hearing, eyesight, any physical problem whatsoever, anyone who had strong contrary views to the Führer, he literally believed they should be exterminated for the purity of the Aryan race. He believed it. He became a guard in a concentration camp. At the end of the war, he and his parents were illegally smuggled out of Germany, as many Nazi war criminals were. And yes, I have changed some of the circumstances there, as I said, to protect the innocent and the guilty. He was not a bad man. I think he had spent his life probably trying to atone for whatever he had done as a 14-year-old boy. And he said to me, look, when the world around you is insane, how do you know what is true and what is false, what is good and what is evil? How do you know? When you're 14 and you realize evil is happening, what can you do? As in fact the girl in Hitler's Daughter realizes that no one listens to 14-year-olds. If you are Hitler's daughter after the war, do you have to say that you're sorry for the evil your father has done? Will you always be Hitler's daughter? Or do we leave the sins of our parents and our ancestors behind? And that is one of the useful things about writing historical fiction and historical fiction for kids. It gives you a place to play with very, very strong and in fact often very modern themes, but they're safely in the past. Most people now accept what Hitler did was evil and was wrong. So it is a safe place to play with very modern themes, but in an area where no one is going to link it too strongly to what's happening today. But it's funny, I only found out one part of that story a couple of months ago when I met my English teacher, who was a wonderful teacher and would give me armloads of books every week. And even after that, I couldn't understand how could this happen? How could, even in a place where the media was controlled, the professions were controlled, how could so many, not just thousands or tens of thousands of people, but millions of people accept this myth? And my English teacher brought me a book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a piece of extremely anti-Semitic propaganda written, I think, in about the 1890s. And she told me a couple of months ago how it was on the coffee table, along with other books she was going to give to me. And a friend of theirs who had survived the concentration camps, came over for coffee, saw the book and said, "What is that book doing here? This is an evil book. Why? How can you have this book?" And she said, "I wanted to lend it to a student." And she said, "Look, what is his name? How old is he?" And my teacher said, "She is 15. And he said, too young, far too young." And my teacher's husband said, "But not too young for Auschwitz." And he thought for a while and he said, "No, perhaps not too young for Auschwitz. Give it to her, but make her understand why this book was written and what happened to it." And the teacher said, "I don't think she needs the explanation." In fact, that still wasn't the end of it. It was 30 years before, in fact, I wrote the book. And even when I wrote the book sets the questions, but it doesn't answer how it happened. And 5 years ago now, I was sent a letter from a boy. It's a special needs school. He was 14. It was the first book and the only book he has ever read. It took a term of assisted reading to read it. And he and his friends had all written me separate letters about what they had got from the book. And his letter simply said, "Dear Jackie French, what I have learned from this book is to be very wary of anyone who tries to make you angry. Love, James." And I suddenly realised that after 30 years, I'd got the answer. Be very careful of anyone who tries to make you angry. You look at the newsreels of Hitler and you realise he is taking a people in extraordinary depression and hideous circumstances, and he made them angry altogether. You only need to look at the crowd at a football match to realise that as humans we enjoy being angry together. And okay, it doesn't matter at the football match, but there is still that in humanity that loves to join together in this wonderful unity and song of anger. And that is what Hitler was so good at doing, at finding the scapegoat, making people angry and giving them the joy of joining together in anger. And it worked. And for a boy like that, he has finally, I think, discovered that particularly for a boy in a special needs school, even on a very personal level, even if there are only one or two or three in the gang, rather than a whole political party, be very, very wary of anyone who tries to make you angry.
That's very powerful, isn't it?
It is, and as I said, it took yet another message from a 14-year-old boy to actually give me the answer I've been looking for so long.
So how did you feel at 14 when you heard all of these stories? What did you make of it at that age?
I'd known the history, we'd read the Diary of Anne Frank. It was hearing it from, I think you could probably only call it the point of view of the war criminal. But not the war criminal. When I was in Germany, a friend took us to lunch, and after lunch, the rather aggressively served roast pork, etc., with these very, very proper, affluent parents. Our friend just went like that. Took us into the study, moved a landscape portrait, undid the safe, took out the signed copy of Mein Kampf, took out the letter written to his father, one of the ones written by Hitler. His father had been one of the early members of the Nazi Party. This was the heart of his father's life still, so many decades. I had never seen or thought of it from the other side. The victims, yes. The people who fought against Nazism, yes. The people who protested, yes. But not the people who had been caught up in it. Another friend's father, who was definitely not a Nazi, in fact had been anti-Nazi, and so strongly anti-Nazi he said it was almost a miracle he actually was not imprisoned for it. But he said, when your country is at war, what do you do? And he was explaining why he joined the German army. He said he knew what they were doing was wrong, but his country was at war. He said the best thing that ever happened to him was actually after 3 weeks he was taken prisoner by the Americans and spent the rest of the war actually farming in America, and ended up then going to agricultural college after the war. And he said, thank goodness I actually did not have to fight in this war. But again, I had to come to this decision. What do? You are German and your country is at war. What do you do? I'd never seen it from the point of view of in effect the other side. But you realise for all of us, how do you know, either as an adult or a child, when the whole worldview around you is wrong? How do you know? And if you are 14, what can you do about it? And what guilt do you bear as an adult for what you weren't able to do at 14? I'm often asked if Hitler had a daughter, and of course if he did have a daughter, I couldn't have written the book. I'm reasonably sure from a lot of research he did have no children. He did, however, have a lot of foster children. He had a very great sense of responsibility to the orphans of the men he'd served with in World War I or early members of the Nazi Party. I read once, though I haven't verified it myself, that before World War II, if you looked in the Berlin phone book, there were several pages of Hitler's. Not necessarily related to Hitler, it was just a not uncommon name. After World War II, if you looked up the Berlin phone book, there was no one called Hitler. And the same happened to his foster children. After World War II, it was not a good idea to be a foster child of Hitler. And again, as far as I've been able to determine, their backgrounds were changed so that there was actually no association with the Führer. And again, these were people who probably bore no guilt. And as with Heidi in the book, often the people closest to the source of power know the least about what's happening, because they are the ones who simply don't hear any of the contrary points of view. They are, in fact, complete innocents, even though to some extent they may be participating in the evil that's happening.
And that's one of the really potent things about this book, is you really put us in the shoes of those people who are close to those experiences.
Yes,
and it raises those, as you say, it raises those questions without answering them that are actually deeply troubling.
Yes.
So that we think about, what would we have done? And I think it's really interesting that this book won an award for Best Book for Most Reluctant Readers.
I think it's won 28 awards so far around the world. It's including kids voting for it. For in fact, it's won several Children's Choice Awards, and books like that don't win Kids' Choice Awards. Kids' Choice Awards are won more. Books like Diary of a Wombat or really funny light books win awards.
But that's what struck me, I think, particularly the Reluctant Readers book, because I think quite often children are underestimated, and this book does not underestimate children. And I think it's very telling that they have voted.
Often reluctant readers, in fact mostly, they are given short, funny books. And if you tell a child you have to read a book, they will go for a short, funny book. But they probably won't read another book by choice after that. The book that hooks kids into reading, and it's no accident that, say, Harry Potter is a big book, Lord of the Rings is a very big book. It's the large books, whether in size or in content and dramatic sweep, that turn kids into readers. And you see these kids frantically leaping page after page after page because they are absolutely hooked in to this book. And I would never mitigate my language for a child. And again, in a book like Lord of the Rings, again, exactly the same. It doesn't matter if a child doesn't understand one word in 6, because by the time they have read that word 18 times, they know it by context. That's how we learn language. If the story and the book are compelling enough, it doesn't matter what language you use. And it certainly doesn't, in fact, it does matter about the complexity of themes. I think children, in fact, the job of a child, the essence of a child, in evolutionary terms, is to work out how the world works and how human society operates. As adults, we have mostly learnt that. Our patterns are set. We are more interested in paying the mortgage or even getting dinner on the table. But for a child, one of their main purposes in life, both in evolutionary terms and in their own interest, is working out how does society operate, what is good and what is evil, and they're often far more interested in than adults in stories with a theme. Adults can see evil triumph in a movie and enjoy it. Kids get extremely upset if they think evil is triumphing. In the sequel to Hitler's Daughter, Pennies for Hitler, I got an email from a boy last week about it, who said he was on chapter 3 and he'd thrown the book across the room because it appeared to him that the bad guys were actually getting away with it without retribution. And he said he's picked it up and he's reading again, but he wanted to know what happened because he didn't want to wait for the rest of the book to actually see if the bad guys got away. He was so viscerally furious at injustice getting away unchecked. And you don't get that, well, with most adults anyway, throwing the book across the room, because they've got such a very, very deep sense of good and evil.